turn to Acts chapter 24. And we're in Acts chapter 24. We're beginning a new chapter. If you remember, if you want to kind of look back in Acts chapter 23, if you remember what was happening in Acts chapter 23, Paul speaks to the Sanhedrin at the first part of the chapter. Things don't go well. They want to kill him. What's new with Paul? And so the soldiers, the Roman soldiers, save him again. And then there's a conspiracy, a plot to try to get Paul moved back to the Sanhedrin. And they're going to kill him. There's a plot. 40 guys have been starving themselves, basically fasting, until such time as they can actually kill him. And when that plot is found out by Paul's nephew, he tells the Roman, the chief soldier there in charge, and they sneak him out of town. And so when we pick up in Acts chapter 24, Paul is now before a man named Felix. And I want to read starting in verse 1, and I want to read down to verse 9 in Acts chapter 24. And if you'll follow along with me, it's kind of difficult to read with a mask on, I understand that. So I will read it, but please follow along. Starting in verse 1, it says, "And after 5 days, Ananias the high priest descended with the elders and with a certain orator named Tertullus, who informed the governor against Paul. And when he was called forth, Tertullus began to accuse him, saying, Seeing that by thee we enjoy great quietness, and that very worthy deeds are done unto this nation by thy providence, we accept it always, and in all places most noble Felix, with all thankfulness, notwithstanding, that I be not further tedious unto thee, I pray thee that thou wouldst hear us of thy clemency a few words. For we have found this man a pestilent fellow, and a mover of sedition among all the Jews throughout the world, and a ringleader of the sect of the Nazarenes, who also hath gone about to profane the temple, whom we took and would have judged according to our law. But the chief captain Lysias came upon us, and with great violence took him away out of our hands, commanding his accusers to come unto thee, by examining of whom thyself mayest take knowledge of all these things whereof we accuse him." So this is the beginning of the time that Paul will spend with Felix. And Acts 24 is almost entirely concerned with Paul's trials before Felix. And Felix was the Roman procurator of Judea at that time. Now, historically speaking, if you look at history and you read about Felix, you're going to find out that Felix, he did a lot to rid the area of thieves who would rob travelers quite frequently. He also put down a number of so-called messiahs, and one of those was the one called that Egyptian, remember, from Acts chapter 21, verse 38. So this, of course, this happens a little bit later. That Egyptian, whoever he may be, is still out and about at this point in our story. But if you recall, this man, the Egyptian, was actually a Jew from Egypt, and that's not unusual. There were Jews living all over the world, and he led a group of men in the wilderness to the Mount of Olives, and there was this plot to overthrow Roman rule. But Felix found out about it, and he brought in the Roman forces to bear, and he crushed the movement altogether. Now, that's the kind of man that Felix was, okay? He was a Roman, all right? Very strong Roman. He wasn't going to put up with no garbage out of nobody. That was his mindset. Paul's trial itself is very interesting to study because the chief prosecutor was a man whose name is Tertullus, okay? And we're going to learn more about him in a minute. But Tertullus was basically an orator, and he was a flatterer extraordinaire. As you read about what he says to Felix there, his approach to getting Paul condemned was simply to compliment Felix. Just say lots of good things about the Roman procurator, and he would agree with the Jews. And so, but it doesn't end well for him because Paul is given a chance to defend himself. And by the end of his defense, and we'll get to this at the toward the end of the chapter, Felix was so moved that he was actually trembling, but he didn't let Paul go, even though he was trembling at Paul's story, obviously under conviction of some type. He didn't want to let Paul go because he thought that maybe he could receive a little money, get a little bribe out of Paul, and if he kept Paul under arrest for a while, which of course never really happens. So Paul was there. In this chapter, we go through 2 years in Acts chapter 24. From the beginning to the end, it's a little over 2 years. And Paul, during this time, he's a prisoner, but he spends a good measure of his time with Felix himself. Felix keeps calling him out to talk to him about things, And no doubt, Paul was a very solid witness to Felix. So we pick up in verse 1, where it says that, and after 5 days, Ananias the high priest descended with the elders, and with a certain orator named Tertullus, who informed the governor against Paul. So first of all, what do we remember about Ananias the high priest? Who can tell me something? Anything. Besides the fact that his name is Ananias. And that he was the high priest. Somebody give me more. Because I explained some very important, crucial information about this man. You remember? Remember when he had Paul smacked in the mouth? And Paul rebuked him and said, "The Lord shall smite thee, thou whited sepulchre." Remember that part? What did we learn about Ananias back then? He was yes. He what? He wasn't really supposed to happen that Paul was not supposed to smoke. That's true. All right, what else do we know? He was a fill-in. The real high priest had been taken care of. He was no longer the high priest. I think they actually killed him, if my memory serves me correctly. Then they didn't have a high priest, and Ananias happened to be nearby, and he had been a high priest before, so they made him the high priest. So he's not really the high priest, but he's the fill-in until they can get a new guy. But now here he is at the beginning of Acts chapter 24, and he comes with the elders, which would of course been the leaders of the nation of Israel, the Sanhedrin, and with this guy, this orator. Orator is a big, long, fancy English word, which means good speaker, named Tertullus. And so they informed the governor against Paul. So the trip from Jerusalem to Caesarea, because that's where they are, they're in Caesarea, it's not a small trip. It's not an easy trip. It's around 60 miles. If you're traveling on animals, 60 miles on horseback is tiring. 60 miles on foot is really tiring. But it didn't matter to them because they so hated Paul. It wasn't enough to get him out of town. It wasn't enough that he was under arrest and really not able to do much. No, they wanted to get rid of him altogether. So they make the trip, they take the long journey, but they hire this guy named Tertullus. I like his name, it sounds like turtle. That's how I remember it. Turtle the Tertullus, Tertullus the turtle. But anyway, they hired this guy to argue their case. And this is interesting because the Romans had their laws, their court procedures, but if you were not a Roman, you were, like one small nation like Israel or one of the other nations that they may have conquered, if you will, you might not be very familiar with all of their proceedings, and most likely probably couldn't speak Latin, which was the language that they would have spoken in courts. That was the official government language. Remember, we talked about that a couple of chapters ago too. And so a lot of what we're reading here was probably spoken in Latin and then translated for us into Greek and then back into English so that we could read it. But the fact is, the Sanhedrin needed somebody to speak for them because they didn't really know the Roman legal, procedures, and they would have had a difficult time. So there were a lot of guys like Tertullus around who would do this sort of thing. It's like what do we call them? Ambulance chasers, the lawyers who just wait for an accident so that they can defend you kind of thing. So he was that kind of guy. And so the Jews needed somebody to plead their case. And so they get Tertullus to come. And verse 2 says, and when he was called forth, Tertullus began to accuse him. So they call Paul out. And he's standing there. I guess in my mind I see, Felix there sitting in his chair, and Tertullus standing off to the side, and the Sanhedrin maybe over here somewhere. And they call Paul forth. And Paul is there. And then Tertullus, it says, began to accuse him, saying, seeing that by thee, speaking to Felix, seeing that by thee we enjoy great quietness, and that very worthy deeds are done unto this nation by thy providence. And this is how Tertullus starts out his address to Felix. Again, we don't know very much about Tertullus. I did as much research as I could. I couldn't find out anything about him really, other than obviously he is an orator, and that the Sanhedrin knew who he was. Obviously Felix knew who he was, and so he's there to bring charges against Paul. Beyond this, anything else we say is speculation. His name is a Greek name, so chances are he was a Gentile. Most likely he was a Gentile because he understood the proceedings of Roman law. So that's about all we can really draw from the case. Historical documents lead us to believe that there were many Tertullus guys around in the first century because there was a big need for those who were not familiar with Roman judicial law to have a representative. So Tertullus took the case. And, it may very well have been that Tertullus himself may not have cared one way or the other, to be honest with you. But he takes the case, and he begins to speak to Felix, and he says in verse 3, "We accepted always and in all places, most noble Felix, with all thankfulness." You read verse 2 and 3 together, and already you know that this guy is one smooth-tongued dude, He is silver-tongued. He knows how to flatter people. He knows how to flatter Felix for sure. He's basically trying to move Felix to be more inclined to give them what they wanted. Again, he may or may not have known a whole lot about Paul's case. He may have not cared one way or the other about Paul at all. But the reality is, he knows how to flatter. He's an orator. That's his job. We don't really have a job like that today. What are you going to do with your life, young man? I'm going to be a professional orator. We don't really have that. We have people who are very good speakers, but as a job, I don't know that anything really, I guess public speaker would be as close as you could come to that, but this is what he was. The reality was, going back to Felix, there were a number of Felix actions that the Jews really didn't like at all. Remember what he said. He said, "We accepted always, in all places, most noble Felix, with all thankfulness." What a guy, right? But the truth is, the Jews didn't really care for Felix. They didn't like him a lot. Felix was a cruel man. On top of everything else that I already told you, he was known to be cruel, coupled with his tendency to be motivated by bribery. And skip down to Acts 24, verse 26. I said that earlier, and a couple of y'all looked at me like, "What? I didn't know that." But it's there, Acts 24, 26, where it says, "He hoped also that money should have been given him of Paul, that he might loose him." So he was waiting for Paul to come up with some money before he let him go. What do we call that? Well, we call that a bribe. Okay? So he wasn't beyond accepting bribery. And because of his cruelty, because of his apparent dishonesty, that actually led to an increase in certain types of crime in Judea, which the Jews really didn't appreciate much. So the period of Felix's rule, we don't get a lot of detail in the Bible other than his interaction with Paul, but when you look at history, you find out that it was really marked by a lot of internal feuds, internal disturbances, and he didn't mind putting that down with a strong hand, with severity. So this is the kind of man that Felix really is. But that's not what Tertullus says. Tertullus says, "Oh, Felix, you're wonderful. Everything you do is wonderful. We love you so much. We're so thankful for you, Felix." And deep down inside, they're like, "Oh man, I hate this guy." All right? So a lot of hypocrisy going on there. Look at verse 4. "Notwithstanding," now remember Tertullus is still speaking to Felix here. He says, "Notwithstanding that I be not further tedious unto thee, I pray thee that thou wouldst hear us of thy clemency in a few words," or a few words, okay? So, first of all, what's clemency? Kindness. To have a charitable spirit to be nice to somebody, you get the idea of clemency, somebody showing kindness, all right? But it's the kind of kindness where you don't necessarily have to do it. You're in a position that you don't really need to do it, but you do it, you know. It's just like, oh, isn't that nice? He didn't really have to be nice to me, but he is nice to me. And so Tertullus says, Felix, you have clemency. And we know that you're going to give us some clemency, and we're just going to speak to you. Just a few words about this case. We don't want to be tedious to you. What does that mean, to be tedious? I'm sorry? Yeah, to make you tired. It's like, you know, anybody remember the old Charlie Brown cartoons? Okay, when I was a kid, there were a couple of times every year when Charlie Brown cartoons were on TV. Does anybody remember what the teacher's voice sounded like? Wah, 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 wah. Right? Remember that? Well, from that, I think it was from that, it kind of became a joke, you know, somebody talking about somebody else being tedious or them talking too much to you, and you just go, blah, 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 all right? So he's saying, Felix, we don't want to just, you know, blah, 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 blah. We don't want to wear you out. We don't want to make you tired with our words. And I hope that you'll show us some kindness that you don't have to show us. We understand that. Just a few words. So what's he doing? He's seeking to play it off as if he knows that they are an inconvenience to him. We're so sorry, Felix. We know that we're an inconvenience to you, but you know, this is kind of an important matter, and we hope that you'll listen to us. We hope that you'll hear us out. So what's he doing? Right at this point, he has flattered Felix. Now he is groveling at Felix's feet, figuratively speaking, of course, trying to get Felix to go, huh, yeah, okay, I like this guy. He says lots of good things about me. That doesn't happen too often. You know, and that's his approach to winning the case. Notice verse 5. Now, Tertullus finally gets around to bringing the charges against Paul. And this is what he says. He says, for we have found this man a pestilent fellow, and a mover of sedition among all the Jews throughout the world, and a ringleader of the sect of the Nazarenes. And he goes on in verse 6 and makes another charge, which we'll get to when we look at verse 6. But here in verse 5, he says basically three things about Paul. First of all, he calls him a pestilent fellow. Then he says he's a mover of sedition. Then he says he's a ringleader of the sect of the Nazarenes. Now, he doesn't say how Paul was a pestilent fellow. He doesn't indicate how he moved them to sedition. His accusations are very general in nature. And I don't know if you've ever dealt with anyone like this, but, you know, somebody ever comes up to me and says, man, Pastor, you know, you're a very mean guy. Like, why? Why do you say that? What did I do? And I immediately want to know what I did to cause you to come to that conclusion. Tertullus just gives the conclusion. He says he's a pestilent fellow. He's a a mover of seditions. He's a ringleader of the Nazarenes. But he never says how he knows this. He never gives any proof at all. There's no proof in the case. He was inaccurate in his accusations. First of all, was Paul what's a pestilent fellow? What's pestilence? First of all, what's pestilence? A what? Disease. How would you like to be called a disease? You're a disease. You're a scourge. You're a blight. Not very nice, okay? He calls Paul a pestilent fellow. I mean, that's funny old English, but what it means is that you're a disease, all right? So he calls him that. Then he says he's a leader of seditions. He's causing sedition among all the Jews everywhere. No, Paul wasn't trying to stir up any sedition anywhere. Then he called him a ringleader of the Nazarenes. Now that was true, because the Nazarenes was a nickname given to the group of Christians because they followed Jesus of Nazareth, Jesus the Nazarene. So that was true. But Paul most likely, what Paul probably said was something along the lines that, Christ is the head of the body of the church. And so that got him all stirred up, If you would have said, Paul, you are the ringleader of the Nazarenes, he would have said, whoa, wait a minute. I might be an apostle, but Jesus is the head, right? So he wouldn't have really taken that as an accusation either. But in doing so, they're saying, Paul, you're a disease to the people. You're a mover of seditions. You're trying to get people stirred up to take some action against Rome, maybe. You're teaching some doctrine that would cause the Jews to rebel. This was his charge. As in the trials of Jesus, they need a charge against Rome. And so this was their charge against Rome. While I was thinking about this the other day, a thought came to me. We as believers, we want our actions to be actions of integrity. We want our actions to be actions that are morally right, that are pure, no secret motives, no hidden agendas, nothing like that. This is what we as Christians seek to live. And I know that there's some people that fail from time to time in that, but by and large, as a people, that's what we are. But the wicked don't see it that way. To the wicked, and I say the wicked because, there are lost people in the world that they don't mind being around Christians or having Christian workers because they know that they're going to be hard workers or they're going to be honest. At least that's a general perception with a lot of people. But then there are others who just hate Christianity. They hate Christ, and they're the ones that I refer to when I say the wicked. So to the wicked, the believer is like a disease. A disease to be purged at the very next convenient moment. This is really why they make the trip to Caesarea. I mean, Paul's in Caesarea. He's not in Jerusalem. He's nowhere near the temple. He's under arrest. He's not able to preach. He's no problem at all to anyone right now. But they make a 60-mile trip so that they can accuse him and try to get him killed. So, as a motive, don't be surprised when you are treated harshly by the wicked for no reason whatsoever. Just know that it comes with the territory, okay? That's a part of the Christian life. The first charge that they made, you're a pestilent fellow, that's just an insult. Nothing to it. The second was a lie, that he was, seditious. The third one, wouldn't have mattered anyway to Felix at all. But they were expecting Felix to take this seriously. But really, Felix doesn't take it all that seriously. We'll see that as we get more into the case here. Notice in verse 6, he says, this man, this seditious person, this blight, this disease, has gone about to profane the temple. At which point Felix probably just rolled his eyes. Oh boy, here we go with that temple stuff again. Because Felix doesn't care about the temple. He's a Roman procurator. He's a Gentile. What does he care if somebody brings a Gentile into the temple? He's probably like, so what? I'd like to go see the inside myself. So why would he even care about that? But Tertullus brings this up, not because it's going to help him win the case, but because he wants Felix to understand why they would have taken care of it on their own. So he says, who also hath gone about to profane the temple, whom we took and would have judged according to our law. Now, according to Jewish law, profaning the temple was a crime punishable by what? I'm sorry? Yeah, death. You profane the temple, you die. Okay? That was their law. So a lot of profaning the temple didn't happen in those days because you would die for it. But most likely, Felix didn't even know that. Why would he know about a religious law in Israel? He's a procurator sitting up there in Caesarea. Probably had no idea that this was, the penalty that according to their law, they were supposed to pay. But Tertullus was not going to divulge that information either. He wasn't going to say, yeah, we caught Paul and we thought that he profaned the temple and we were going to take him according to our law and judge him, which means we were going to kill him, because they were not allowed to do that. The Romans were the only ones who could pass the death sentence, and the Jews couldn't. So Tertullus doesn't share that information because that they wouldn't have been allowed to carry it out, and that wouldn't have brought a whole lot of approval with Felix. So he doesn't share that. But it's a false charge altogether. Remember what really happened. Going all the way back to Acts chapter 21, what really happened. There was no Gentile. He never profaned the temple. Paul had done no such thing. Well, what's really happening here? Tertullus is setting up his next point. His next point, which was, if the Roman soldiers hadn't come in and rescued him, then we wouldn't be bothering you at all, O great Felix. Because that's where they're going. So look at verse 7. We'll do verse 7 and then I think we'll stop there. Verse 7, he says, But the chief captain Lysias came upon us, and with great violence took him away out of our hands. All right, what is he talking about? Does anybody remember? Yeah, go. You don't remember?
Just simply when they came to see what all the writing was about.
I'm sorry, sir, I can't really hear you up here. I have fans and masks and everything in the way.
That was when they came to see what all the fuss was about. They took him away.
Yeah, so there's the Sanhedrin. They've got Paul. They're probably jerking him every which way but loose. And the soldiers are like, whoa, 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 they're going to kill this guy. We don't even know what's going on. And so they rescued Paul and they brought him out. Right? So it's pretty interesting to me that after all that they had done, the Sanhedrin, after all that they had done, that they would accuse Lysias of being the violent one. Because it was the Sanhedrin who was ready to tear Paul limb from limb and literally drag him to death in the street. They were the ones that were violent, but now they're saying, we would have taken care of this matter. But Lysias, he came in and violently took Paul away. What a twist. What a, you talk about revisionist history, there it is. All right? This is revisionist history right here. And he tries to make it sound like they would have never bothered poor Felix if Lysias had not intervened. So we'll stop here today. We'll come back to verse 8 next week where he continues with his charge. I had hoped to finish 8 and 9 today, but we're already a little over time. And I've got, a couple of people already sleeping and a couple others looking like they want to. So we'll stop here, okay? So with that, any questions or comments before we close? Yes? No? No? All right. In that case, Brother Kerry, close us in prayer and then we'll be dismissed.